Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Just going to wait for other folks to come in, and then we will get started. And as you're all coming in, if you just wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat, where you're from. I know you're all affiliated with MERPA, but if you want to just share your role, where you're from, and what are you most excited for this spring and summer season? We're in May finally, even though we're still experiencing some of those April showers. Hopefully we're heading into some warmer days. So I want to know what you're all looking forward to as the warmer months come up. Oh, I apologize. I apologize. The chat was disabled. I enabled it now. So now everyone should be able to share that information in there. Thank you, Deb, for letting me know that. Welcome to those who are just hopping on. We're just waiting for others to hop in the last minute or so. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, what your role is through MERPA, how you're affiliated, where you're from, and what you're most excited for with the warmer months coming up. Looking forward to some warm weather and biking. Nice. Yes, I am also looking forward to the warm weather. Warm weather and water activities. Nice. Spending time with family. Wonderful. Time at the beach. Love it. I also love the beach. That's one of the nice things about the warmer months in Maine is getting to enjoy the coast. And we'll just give the rest of the folks another minute or so to hop on, just in case anyone's having a little difficulty connecting, and then we'll jump right into it. All right, we will go ahead and get started. For those who just joined recently, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I also did ask the other participants to share what they're most excited for with the warmer weather coming up, so feel free to share that as well. I just wanted to thank you all for inviting me to come talk with you about mental health. I am very passionate about this topic. I've been doing a lot of work and trying to build a lot of different connections over the last few years with different organizations and leaders and just people who care about youth and who care about each other that want to learn more and continue the conversation about how we can support each other and, just recognize that mental health is a real struggle. And with it being Mental Health Month today, beginning today, May is Mental Health Month. This is the perfect time to start this conversation and for you all to explore as an organization how you want to really address these needs. So I'll introduce myself in a moment, a little bit about my background, but today we are going to be talking about youth mental health and how we can understand it in the youth population and how you as MERPA staff can help support them. All right, so a little bit about myself. My name is Brittany Dunphy. I am the community health educator at Redington-Fairview General Hospital. A lot of what I do is a lot of different things. It would take me too long to explain everything that I do here, just because there's only one of me, and there is a lot of areas that I cover when it comes to community health and health education, but my passion is mental health. So I do enjoy doing a lot of that. That is what takes up a lot of my role here. So a little bit about my background. I actually didn't go to school to work in healthcare. It was never on my radar. I went to school for mental health, and I had intentions of working in the social services field. And that's exactly what I did after my time in college. After I got my degree, I went right into work in the nonprofit social services field. I worked with children and families who had developmental needs, behavioral needs. So that's my background. That's where I was before I came to Redington. When I got here, it was right in the thick of COVID. Mental health was a huge need, not just in general, but also with our healthcare workers. And so I really had a wonderful opportunity to take my education and my passion and bring it into Redington. So that's just a little bit about me and why I'm here and why I'm doing what I do. So just a few housekeeping items. You'll notice that this is a different platform than a regular Zoom meeting. This is a Zoom webinar, so you don't have the option to do things that you would on a normal Zoom meeting. You don't have the option to come off of mute, but if you do want to share something, please use the Q&A and the chat feature. If you want to have a question that will be answered towards the end of the presentation, please put it in there. You don't have to wait to enter that later on. If I'm sharing something or talking about something and you want to, just chat your colleagues, share something, or provide any feedback, please use the chat as well. As you notice, this webinar is being recorded for those who couldn't make it to this time, or maybe if you want to go back and watch this recording later after this class later on this week, I will be providing the link to this video to Deb, and she will disperse it out to everyone. I am going to be having some interactive opportunities for you all today, so I just ask that you would take advantage of it. One, it just kind of helps keep you engaged because it is a webinar platform versus a regular Zoom meeting. And it just helps me know where everyone is at today and, how I can help continue this work through Redington. So some of the things that we're going to be going over today, just within our short hour, is youth culture and development, what that looks like. It's really important that we talk about that first to kind of lay that foundation of just what it's like for a youth to be, going through those changes in today's society and mental health. What does the mental health look like in youth right now? What's available to youth and their families? That's one thing that I hear a lot from people is, they want to help youth, they want to help families, but they don't know where to send them. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to offer them. I'm going to be sharing that with you. And then lastly, it's important that you're all supporting each other because we can't help support others if we're not taking care of ourselves and watching out for one another. So we're going to wrap up our time together today with a little bit of that self-care and peer support as well. So I'm going to start out our time right now with a poll. And I won't share the results. This first poll is really just for me to gauge how you're all doing today. So that poll should be up on your screen now. And if you could just take a moment to just answer that, I would appreciate it. Thank you. All right, I'll give a few more moments for the last couple folks to answer. All right, we'll go ahead and end that. Thank you. So this is something that I actually incorporate this question into most of my programs for a few different reasons. One, I do a lot of facilitation and a lot of teaching. And so for me as a facilitator and as a teacher, this question really helps me gauge how people are doing. In terms of meetings, if I'm leading a meeting and I'm asking a bunch of questions and I'm not getting a whole lot of feedback, I might internalize that as, I'm not saying it clearly, maybe, something's going on. And so if I just ask up front, before anything ever starts, how are you really feeling today? It's going to give me a little bit more perspective. So if the room's quiet, but they've already told me, most of them have told me that, they're just overwhelmed today or they're tired because of, X, Y, and Z. It gives it a little bit more perspective. The other reason, because I do focus on mental health a lot, is generally speaking, we use that "how are you" question as just, small talk. How are you doing today? Oh, I'm fine, thanks. How are you? And, there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I do think it's important, especially if we're, around our peers, is really asking intentionally, how are you really doing today? Are you overwhelmed today? Or, are you feeling good? I heard you had a great weekend. Just, asking those intentional questions and then giving people a chance to, have a space to really answer that honestly. So thank you all for answering that today. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the youth culture and development. And again, this is important to just kind of lay that foundation. So when we do start talking about mental health and maybe some warning signs or what to pay attention to, we have to really know, what is it like for a youth going through this stage in their life? So, we know that youth are going through a lot of physical changes, right? I mean, youth go through puberty at very different times, but that's a huge one that youth are going through, and it's going to affect a lot of their life, and they're trying to figure that out. Some different mental changes, they're trying to figure out how to problem solve a lot more. So they're just, throughout development, they're going to start relying on adults a little bit less because they're trying to figure out how to make it in the world. Reactions to stress as well, because there's a lot that's going on in their life, even with peers, and we'll talk about social stuff in a minute. They're trying to figure out how to react to that. There's a lot of emotions that are going on in them, a lot of developmental changes. With the social, I think a lot of us are aware of this is, youth are trying to navigate the social norms. They're trying to navigate their peers. What is that culture looking like for them? As they get older, they're going to start noticing, that there are just different types of cliques and friend groups and, how do their peers view them? And then those emotional changes. Some of those emotional changes can be related to the puberty, the physical changes. They can just be like that chemical changes that are going to influence their emotions. And then some of that is also related to the social changes. So how and when they are supposed to express emotions, especially once they get into those high school years, they probably are a little bit more worried about how their friends are viewing them, how adults are viewing them. So within all of these changes, the youth are really trying to figure out who they are. And so, for adults, especially parents or other adults that have a connection with the youth, they're also trying to figure out what's going on with this youth. And so if a youth is trying to figure out, who they are in this world, how to navigate all these things, their interests might be changing because they're genuinely changing, or they're changing because they're trying to fit in with, their social group. Sometimes it can be hard to differentiate, what is concerning and what's not. So again, just trying to go through all these changes because these are typical changes that youth are going to go through, and just reminding ourselves that this is what really helps youth figure out who they really are and who they want to be. So I'm going to do kind of a little comparison of what's typical and what's not typical. And when I say not typical, it's really in a general sense, it's really important that we know what's typical and not typical for that specific youth. But these are just in a general sense to kind of give us an idea. So what's normal for youth? It's normal for youth as they grow up that they're going to start withdrawing from their family to spend more times with their friends. It can be hurtful, especially for a parent, to see their child, kind of pull away and want to spend less time with family, but it's normal. And just to kind of remember that that's typical for most youth. What's not typical and what is kind of a warning sign or something that you should be, having that red flag go off in your head is that they're withdrawing not only from friends, not only from family, but also from their friends and what social activity they enjoy. So really just withdrawing completely and not just to spend more time with friends. Other things that are typical is occasionally losing their temper when things don't go their way. I think every single person who interacts with a teenager, or you probably remember when you were a teenager that, when something doesn't go your way, it feels like the world's ending, right? And so they're probably going to lose their temper at times. But what's not typical and what is kind of that, cause for, for you to look into something a little bit more is if the youth is frequently arguing with adults and or purposely breaks the rules. And then they may also be aggressive during that time. So it's not just losing their temper when things don't go their way. It's a behavior that's taking over their life and all of their social situations. This next one I've noticed just in my work that is really hard for families and even for other adults, you don't have to be a parent, is, watching a child move away from their childhood likes to teen interests. Sometimes depending on the interest, it can feel like, the youth isn't, who they used to be. But again, youth are going through all of these different changes and where they're really trying to figure out who they are. And so if a child through their younger childhood years, maybe they always did gymnastics. And then now that they're, growing up, they've decided that they want to play an instrument, they want to be in a band, or they want to, play a really, physically intensive sport. For some families and some adults, it may feel like, oh my gosh, like, who is this person? You're not doing anything that you like. Well, they're just going through those changes, right? They're trying to figure out who they are. And it's completely normal for them to not want to do what they did when they were little and, trying to find some new interests. What's not typical and what's kind of cause for that concern is that they're losing interest in their favorite activity and they're not replacing it with something else. So that kind of goes back to that first red flag is they're withdrawing from everything, right? So they're no longer interested in things that they enjoy, and they're not trying to find something else to replace it with that reflects the different changes and where they are in their life. Last one, again, we all know, especially with teens, is that they sometimes struggle to complete an undesired task. Even adults do that, but typically that is typical development for youth. But what's that red flag is that they're having difficulty staying focused across a variety of tasks and settings, that they're not able to focus, they're withdrawn, they're not engaged, and it's not like them. And again, it's going back to what's not typical for that youth. If the youth for their entire, childhood, their entire development, they've always had difficulty staying focused across a variety of settings and tasks, that might be attributed to something else. But if it's a youth that, really has been able to stay focused and stay engaged, and all of a sudden they're not across all settings, that's a cause for concern for us to look into that. So one of the things that I really, really stress, and this isn't just youth, this is for anybody, this could be for your peers, for your other adults in your life, is that if you see something concerning and you're concerned about it, just reach out. It's important to know, again, what's not normal. But if you're building that rapport for the youth and where the work that you're all doing, you're spending a lot of time with youth anyway. And so if you have that rapport with that youth, just ask them. It can be a little bit intimidating, obviously, because we don't know how they're going to react. But sometimes it just takes that, someone asking them for them to really open up. And it almost can kind of feel like a relief if you do notice something. All right, so I'm going to have another poll. I'm just trying to gauge how, you all feel comfortable with things. So if you notice some concerning changes in a youth, how comfortable would you be approaching them about it? Awesome. Great. Thank you. So most of you had shared that you'd feel pretty comfortable, whether it was somewhat comfortable or completely comfortable. A few weren't sure. That's all right. My hope is that, for those who aren't sure, or if you're somewhat comfortable, I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you at least feel like you have another kind of like a toolkit of resources, so that if you did approach a youth who was struggling and was displaying some concerning behaviors, that you would feel equipped enough to point them in the right direction. So before we continue, one of the things that I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about is that mental health and mental illness are not the same thing. This is something that I really make sure that I stress in every single setting that I talk about mental health, because sometimes we get them mixed up. Whether, some people really believe that mental health and mental illness are the same, or sometimes we just say it, we don't realize it, we're talking, it just kind of slips out, but we use them interchangeably a lot. And that honestly is kind of what does add to the stigma, is that we're afraid to talk about it. We don't talk about it enough, and we don't really know how to talk about it. So when I talk about mental health, especially in my mental health first aid class, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is the differences between mental health and mental illness, and how does it compare to physical health and physical illness. So I'm just going to go through my spiel just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And if you know this already, you're good to go. Just hang tight with me. So the way that I describe it, especially to youth, when I'm talking about this for them to understand, is, I'll ask them, what happens when you go to the doctor? Well, when you go to the doctor, generally speaking, if you're going for your yearly physical or your checkup, they're gonna ask you a bunch of questions. They're gonna listen to your heart. They're gonna take your weight, your height. They might ask you about your sleep. They might ask you about, your eating, your physical activity habits. And that's just because they want to make sure that we're physically healthy, that we're taking care of our bodies. Every single one of us has physical health. Just because you go to the doctor every year and you get asked all these questions doesn't mean that you have a physical illness. It can help identify if you do, but that doesn't mean that you are physically ill just because you have physical health. And so once we, I say that, people are always like, well, yeah, that makes sense, right? I knew that. But then it really kind of goes back to making sure that we're not using mental health and mental illness interchangeably. We all have mental health. Every single one of us, just like we have physical health. However, some people do have mental illness. And then that's a whole nother ball game. And so really what I try to do my best to teach people is how to, understand mental health more, know what mental health challenges are more prominent in certain age groups, how to address it, how to identify it. Because unless you're a therapist, there's really not a whole lot that you can do for someone with a mental illness other than just pointing them in the right direction. So if we can, catch someone in the early stages of mental health challenges, hopefully we can get them the help they need before it turns into a severe mental illness. So the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is SAMHSA, some of you may have heard that before. They define mental health as being our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act, and helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. So even with that definition, it's very clear that we all have mental health. So not trying to beat a dead horse, but I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And, as we're talking about this, now I'm kind of passing that responsibility on to all of you to help eliminate that interchangeable use of the two phrases, because they really aren't the same. So these are some statistics that I have up here given to us by NAMI Maine, and I will go through them very quickly, but I think these are really helpful to kind of put into perspective of where our youth are at. And these statistics are from 2020. They're the most recent statistics that they've given us. So don't have anything more recent than that. So high school students with depression are 2 times more likely to drop out than their peers who don't have depression. 1 in 6 youth ages 6 to 17 experienced a mental disorder in 2020. 14,000 Maine youth ages 12 to 17 have depression, and 49.2% of Maine youth ages 12 to 17 who had depression did not get any care in 2020. This last one, some of that can be attributed to the fact that there is, just there's a long wait list for a lot of services in Maine. But some of that is just attributed to people just don't know where to go. And the adults in their life that want to help don't know where to send them. They don't know what resources to give them. And, again, we know that mental health and mental illness are not the same thing. And so if we can try to reach youth who are just experiencing, just exhibiting the warning signs that something is going on, the hope is that we can reach them before it becomes a mental illness or mental disorder if they're just struggling. But even the same, if a student has a mental illness, if they are struggling with something like depression or anxiety, and it's showing up, if it's impacting their ability to stay focused and stay engaged, we can still know where to send them. So here are some more statistics. These are from the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey. Somerset Public Health uses the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey. Sorry about that. They use this a lot in their work. And the nice thing about this is because this is all youth reported. It doesn't capture every single youth. This is just the percentage of students that responded. And so I have a comparison of 2 years that they did this survey. I have the 2019 and then the 2021. 2021 is most recent. And I wanted to compare it just to, give us a little bit of an idea of, what's going on in the youth community. Granted, over those 2 years, COVID did happen, so that probably is a contributing factor, but it's still important for us to realize that these statistics are getting worse. So the first question is, in the past 12 months, did you ever feel sad, hopeless, almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row that stopped you from doing usual activities? And the percentage of middle schoolers who said yes in 2021 was 29.6%, which was an increase from 2019. And then for high schoolers, again, it was an increase from 2019, where 35.9% of them said yes. During the past 12 months, did you ever seriously consider attempting suicide? The percentage of middle schoolers who said yes rose just a little bit, but it still did raise, which is still concerning. It was at 20% of middle schoolers who answered the survey said yes. And then the high schoolers who said yes was 18.5%, which was almost a 2% increase overall. So some, alarming statistics. I think it's always important to throw this in there because it does give us a good picture about where our state's at, where the youth are at. And, just to remind us that we are all in a very, beneficial position to really reach these youth before it becomes to this point, right? Before any of the youth in our state are seriously considering attempting suicide. If we can reach these youth before it gets to that point, the goal and the hope is that we would help them before that thought even crosses their mind and they even start contemplating that. So I have another poll for you. And this question is in regards to not just the last slide, but also the slide before that. So the statistics overall that we just reviewed, what is your reaction to that? Okay. Thank you. So most of the group said that they were not surprised, that the data kind of reaffirmed what they already knew. But then there was close to half of you who said that you were surprised that, maybe you knew it was bad, but you didn't realize that it was that high. So, that is why I show these, is because if you, think that they're bad, but they're not, you didn't really know that they were that, that startling. Again, I want to reiterate that and use those statistics to help, push us and make us more motivated to help reach these youth before it gets to that point. All right, I've got poll number 4 for you already. If a youth and or their family was struggling with a mental health challenge or mental illness, would you know what resources to give them? Okay, we're at a 50-50 split, which is really interesting. That's wonderful. If those that feel like they do know that you would know where to send them, that's great. If you don't know where you would send them, I hope that the information that I'm going to give you is going to be helpful in that. I will let you know, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but when this recording does get sent out, I will make sure that I send you information to all of these resources that I'm going to list. So you don't have to worry about jotting them all down and then going and trying to Google them. I will send these to you. So what supports are out there? First one that comes to my mind, that I think probably comes to most people's minds, are social services or mental health agencies. Depending on where you live in the state, these agencies may vary. I will just kind of go over a list of them that are pretty common around the state, but again, depending where you are, you may have a very small agency. So these, would include places like Kennebec Behavioral Health, Maine Behavioral Health Organization, Community Health and Counseling Services, Crisis and Counseling Centers, and then the mobile crisis units. Depending on where you live, it's going to be really important that you familiarize yourself with what's there, and also what services that they provide, because they don't always all provide the same services. Some of them have longer wait lists than others, but you can at least familiarize yourself of what's there and what services they actually provide, you can help point the people in those directions. The last one that I had mentioned, the mobile crisis units, they actually had a change to that model, which I'll share about. The other thing about that is that the state of Maine has specific contracts with agencies around the state of Maine that hold those crisis contracts. I'm in Skowhegan, so the agency that holds that contract here is Crisis and Counseling Centers. Depending on where you are, it might be different. So previously, the way that worked is that you had to actually be in crisis for the mobile unit to respond. Now they're not even requiring that you are in actual crisis. You could have warning signs of crisis, and they've actually found that since they've made that change, the majority of the calls that they're getting are being resolved over the phone. So just for you to know that if a youth is really struggling, you can call the mobile crisis unit and talk with them about that over the phone, and hopefully de-escalate. And so you don't have to actually have someone respond to your actual location. Different support groups, there are, not a whole lot listed on the internet, but I bring this up because there are often a lot of local ones. I know in Skowhegan, there are a lot of local groups that aren't advertised on the internet, and they're just kind of word of mouth, and I get them through my contacts. So again, familiarizing yourself with what's in your area. NAMI Maine offers a lot of online support groups. Their website lists all the different offerings. I, again, will send you the link to that website and the list of that. If you, and this doesn't have to just be for youth. This could be for families as well. If the family is struggling with the youth and the youth's challenges, there could be a support group out there for them to connect with other people. And then, there's always an opportunity for local organizations to create their own support groups. If you know that you have a large portion of youth and families who are really struggling, try to band together with your local leaders and create something that could be beneficial for your community. The crisis line I have up here, I did put 988. I'm not sure how many people are aware of the 988 option now. It is out there. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about 988 because it is still in the very early stages, and there is a lot about it that people don't know. So the goal behind 988 was to make the crisis line easier to remember for people, similar to how you remember 911, right? If there's an emergency, you would call 911 and someone would be dispatched and respond to that. So the goal behind 988 is, one, to make it more streamlined and for it to be easy to remember. So people who are experiencing a crisis, they don't have to remember a 1-800 number. The one thing that I just recently learned, I went to the NAMI conference in February or March. It was the one in Augusta, and I attended a session on 988. And one of the things that they made very clear, and I want to make very clear to everyone and pass that knowledge on, is that 988 is not integrated across the United States right now. That is one of the goals. But when you call 988, depending on what your area code is for your cell phone, is the 988 crisis response office that you're going to be connected to. So if you have a 207 number for Maine and you call 988, you're going to be connected to the Maine response office. If you or a youth has, a South Dakota area code and you call 988, you're going to be connected to South Dakota. So it's just one of those important things to remember. Obviously, if you're in a crisis, you might not be thinking about that. So just knowing that if you do and you have an area code that's not 207, you may have to wait a little bit for them to transfer you to the main one. The other thing about the crisis line that I like to tell people is that you don't have to be the one in crisis to call. If you are just assisting a youth or, a family, one of their family members, or even someone in your own life, you are allowed to call the crisis line and talk through that scenario. You can also call and talk with them after you've worked with the youth. So, let's say, you're interacting with a youth, they're really struggling. You feel like they might be going into crisis, or they are in crisis, or you don't feel good after that interaction. They've gone home. You can call the crisis line and talk through that with someone and ask them, what do you think I did well? What can I do better? What suggestions do you have for me? And they'll give you that advice and they'll talk through that. So just knowing that you don't have to be the one in crisis to call 988, and you don't have to be in crisis to call the Maine Mobile Crisis Unit anymore. So just a couple things to remember. And there are tons of online resources, which I believe is on my next slide. And this is something that I will be sending out with the recording. This is a sheet that I had made up for one of our local middle schools around here. I went to talk with them a few weeks ago about how to support their friends and where to, get extra support and resources. I will send this out to you. It's just a comprehensive list of resources for youth. As adults, you can definitely go around and poke in there and see what it has to offer. But these are geared specifically towards youth. In a perfect world, it would be wonderful, and it is ideal that every single youth would have an adult in their life, would have a parent even that they could go to and talk. But the reality is that's not the case. And so the more information, the more resources that we can give youth to go on and find support, the better. So if you are working with a youth and they need something more, please feel free to share these resources with them. And then another support is you. Research shows that people are more likely to open up to someone that they know and trust versus someone that they don't. And so if you have a rapport with a youth that is struggling, thinking back to one of those very first polls, a lot of you said that you would feel comfortable, approaching them if you notice that something was a little bit off for that youth. If you have that rapport with them, they're more than likely going to open up to you. And if they don't the first time, they might the next time. So don't underestimate your ability and your value to be that support for a youth, because you might be the only one that they're going to trust in that moment. And so just kind of going back to believing in yourself and knowing that you can have a major impact on youth, which The fact that you're all here listening to me talk about this tells me that you all want to be there for the youth. So just, remind yourself that you are a support and don't underestimate the impact that you could have on them if they are struggling. I very briefly mentioned this program earlier on. I did want to talk a little bit about it because it is one of the more comprehensive programs that we offer here at Redington-Fairview. Some of you may have heard of this program before, and if you have, and maybe even took it before, it did undergo some significant revisions in 2020. And so it looks a little bit different than it did years ago. I say that because I also took this class years ago before the revisions, and it was in 2020. So this is an evidence-based program that is taught actually all over the world. It's taught throughout the United States, but there are actually a lot of other countries across the world that have their version of this program. It did originate in Australia. So if you're familiar with the Youth Mental Health First Aid Program, you know about Algie, our little koala bear, who is our little mascot for that. And it was trialed in the United States with a partnership of a couple of states out in the Midwest. They felt like it was beneficial here, and so it just kind of turned into this big movement. We at Redington are trying to promote this program more. We have been doing it, but we will offer this to anyone, depending on where you're based at. I know that MERPA is the overall organization, but if your smaller organizations would like a training, please reach out to me and we can talk about the logistics of that. The way that I describe this program to people who may not know about it is I compare it to regular first aid. So we teach first aid to lay people who you don't have to have medical background. You don't even have to have, even given first aid, but we teach you first aid because we want you to know what to do if someone needs a little bit of medical help. And it's what you give them before they go on to get professional medical help, right? So it's the same thing with mental health first aid. A lot of people get overwhelmed and a little bit intimidated by the name of it because they are worried that it's going to be too intense or they're going to have all this responsibility after. And that's not the case. So this is really the mental health version of regular first aid. We're teaching people how to respond and support someone who is experiencing a mental health challenge and then pointing them in the direction of getting professional help. That's not to say that a therapist can't take this class. It would be helpful, we would never discourage that, but we want people to realize that there is never going to be an expectation after this training that you're going to have to diagnose and treat a youth. It's just learning how to support them and pointing them in the right direction. What I'm talking about today, everything that I've gone over so far, is just a very, very condensed version of what we actually talk about in this. We do a lot of skills practice in this program. We talk about language. We talk about, what specific supports and what we should actually be doing in these situations. And within that skills practice, you actually get to work with each other and work through different scenarios to get comfortable with the language and the supports that are out there. So I always like to put a plug in for this just because it is a wonderful program. I will share a little bit of story. I do like to share the story because I think it puts it into perspective a little bit about how helpful it can be. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this program, I went to school for mental health. I worked in the social services field after college before I came to Redington. I worked in the field where every single day I was working with youth who had mental health challenges. And I took this class and I found it helpful. So my outlook on it now, because now I'm an instructor for this class, is if someone like me who went to school for this and was working in this very specific field that had to do with youth mental health, and I found it helpful, how much more helpful would it be for someone that didn't go to school for that didn't have the training, that wasn't working in it every single day? And that's not to say that, I felt like I was great at it, because I knew that I had, areas to work on, even though I did go to school for that. So I just kind of share that story because I do want to encourage people to take it, and just, being willing to have those tough conversations. And Even if you feel confident in your knowledge and your ability to talk with youth, sometimes having someone like that be in one of these classes is going to help the entire class learning environment. Sometimes it's not always about what you're going to learn, but what someone else might learn from you. So I always like to share this. If you are interested in one of these trainings, please reach out to me and we can talk about logistics. And then the last portion of this is how can you support each other? Because your colleagues, you're working with a lot of the same populations, maybe at different ends of the state, but some of you on here may be, with your direct coworkers. So how can we support each other while we're having these conversations? One is self-care. I talk about self-care a lot here at the hospital, and I know that self-care is kind of a term that's thrown around a lot, but I do like to talk about it because our American culture has this weird, skewed perception of what self-care really is. We tend to slap the self-care title onto things that are just indulgences in life, which are important, and they can be a part of self-care, but they are not truly self-care. You cannot help a youth to the best of your ability if you're not yet taking care of yourself. It's important to pay attention to your own emotional state, both during and after helping a youth. If a youth is experiencing something and they're struggling with something that is a sore spot for you, whether you've personally experienced it or a loved one has experienced it and it's bringing up a lot of feelings for you, it's okay that you're not the right person to help that youth. So pay attention to your emotions and your own state during that, but then also after. A lot of people, even who have experienced something similar, they may be able to, dissociate from that for a little bit and focus on the youth, but maybe after the situation, that's when their emotions are coming in. And so just paying attention to that, knowing what you need and what your own boundaries are, because again, if you're not helping yourself, you can't fully effectively help all the youth that you're working with. And then supporting each other. This is a huge one, because you are a team and you're all working towards a very similar goal. And so just some different things that you can do to support each other. Debriefing is huge. Debriefing does not have to be complicated. It can be as simple as what went well, what didn't go well, and what would you do differently next time if you had to do it over again. It can be a simple 5 to 10 minute conversation, but just offering that up to each other, to just give each other that space to talk through that, could be really important for that person who just had to work with that youth. Peer support groups are great. They don't have to be super structured. If you feel like your organization and your small team would benefit from a peer support group, just make one. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be intense. It can just be a specific amount of time set aside for every single person to just come and just share what they're going through, what they need to get off their chest. Encourage self-care between each other. If you notice that one of your peers seems to be struggling after, interacting with a youth, supporting a youth, just encourage them to take care of themselves. The way that I describe self-care, because there's a lot of definitions out there and a lot of ways that people talk about self-care. When I was in college, I had a professor that told my class that self-care is building a life that you don't want to escape from. And I've never forgotten that, because I have never found a truer definition of what self-care really is. Because self-care is going to be different for every single person. There's no right or wrong way to do self-care, but it is so much more than binging a Netflix show. It's so much more than, going to Dunkin' Donuts or taking a bubble bath. It's so much more than that, right? And so what does it look like for you to have a life that you don't want to escape from? And whatever it's going to take that to get there, that is your self-care. That's what self-care really is. And so encourage that within each other. Continuing education and training. Again, this is a very short version of what we can do in larger trainings, but still, you're still devoting an hour out of your time to come and learn about this more. So I just want to recognize that and thank you all for taking the time out of your day to do this. And this is a part of it. This is a part of that support, is just continuing your knowledge and your awareness and continuing that conversation to make sure that you're at where you should be, or you feel comfortable. Different support services as well. And then always counseling and therapy. there's nothing wrong with counseling and therapy. There's still a weird stigma around it. I think we're getting better. I like to think so, but just know that that is always an option and there's no shame in it. I'm a huge advocate for therapy. I think that every single person should go to therapy at least once in their life. Even if you don't have a mental illness, you can still go to therapy. And sometimes just having that set aside time every week or every 2 weeks to just have someone that is a third party, has no ties to anything, can just sit there and you can just word vomit. You can just get it all out and they'll listen. And sometimes that speaks volumes. It makes you feel good. And so if you feel like you need a little bit extra other than, just self-care and peer support, just consider it. All right, so I'm going to kind of revisit my first question because I asked you all how you really were at the beginning of the training. I want to know how you're really feeling now. Do you feel a little bit better? If do you feel empowered? It's going to be the same options, but just kind of check in with yourself. How are you really feeling right now? And those questions should be up. Okay, thank you. Well, that's great. Feelings are changing a little bit. I have more people who answered that they were okay or energized and happy. And so that makes me happy. Makes me feel like your time here with me was beneficial and it was worth your time. So again, I hope that you feel empowered to continue on this work and just continue the conversation. And any questions at all? I have a couple more things that I want to wrap up with, but I just want to leave space for some questions. Again, that question and answer box is still there. Please feel free to enter any questions or thoughts that you have, or if you have any thoughts, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll wait a couple seconds. And if those questions are coming in, no worries. I just want to talk a little bit about how I can stay connected with you all. And if you have any thoughts or needs about, how to continue education or just even find more resources. Again, my name is Brittany Dunphy. I work in community health at Redington-Fairview General Hospital. My contact information is there, both my email and phone number. Either one is fine. I work Monday through Friday. Please reach out with any questions or thoughts. I also put a couple links here. One to our community education page, which just has exclusive information of our ongoing programs that we run throughout the year, programs that you can contact us for to get special training, special kind of like private training. And then we also have our calendar of events, which is just upcoming classes that actually have dates where you can actually go on and see what's coming up. So both of those resources are there for you as well. Okay, so I do have a question in here. So one of the question, so I'm actually seeing a lot more questions coming in. So the first question is, can you give an example of a child in crisis versus about to be in crisis? So I won't give you an example, but I will give you a tool that we learn in mental health first aid to identify what it looks like to be in crisis. So when we teach mental health first aid, we break down scenarios into 3 different sections. So we first look at early signs and symptoms. So those are the things that we talked about at the very beginning of this presentation of, we're noticing that they're withdrawing a little bit more. We're noticing that, they don't seem to be hanging out with their friends anymore. They're not doing so well in school. So just things that aren't typical for that youth. So those are the things that we would note, that we would categorize as early signs and symptoms. Those are the things that we want to notice and we can address right away. And then the hope is that we would kind of support that youth to get back on track. Then we go into worsening signs and symptoms. And so this is the area that we really have to put kind of like our big goggles on and, make sure that we're listening, because that's when we get into the point where they're close to crisis. If we don't correct this, if we don't address this, this is where we, they could be about to go into crisis. So that's the second phase. And so, all right, we've noticed the early signs and symptoms, we've addressed it, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And now we're realizing that if we don't address it and we don't get it fixed right now, it's going to go into crisis. And then that crisis area is like, we need help right now. This is when you're calling 911. This is when you're calling, 988. This is when we're getting help right away because it's urgent and it's serious. That worsening signs and symptoms is like the serious, but it's not urgent. We don't need help right this second or something bad is going to happen. So I hope that helps a little bit. The reason I don't give scenarios or examples is because I don't want to mistakenly be stigmatizing in my language, and two is it's going to look different for every single person. So that's kind of the framework that we give for that. If you want to practice more, if you feel like you need more education and practice on crisis and how to address that, that's where that youth mental health first aid information comes in. And the next question I have in here is, we are seeing more and more youth on SSRIs and SNRIs. Are you seeing that as well? I personally don't see that in my work. My work is specifically on education. With that, I will say I work very closely with people who are who work in that direct field. I'm also on one of the boards at KBH, and so I do, hear from their clinicians as well. I would say that is probably what I'm hearing. I'm not necessarily seeing it, but I would agree that clinicians are seeing more children on medications. I'm not a clinician, so I can't say that's why. I'm sure we could all speculate as to why. But yes, I would agree that may be something that the clinical realm is seeing a little bit more of. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And before you all go, I would just ask that you would consider filling out a survey. With everything else, I do love to hear feedback. It's the only way that I can continue to grow as a presenter, teacher, facilitator. So please, 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 consider sharing your feedback. I'm going to put the link in the chat right now. Please feel free to click on it, fill that out. It is anonymous. So it will just help me know if this was helpful for you. How did I do as an instructor? So I can continue to provide this education going forward. And again, if you'd like to set up, whether it's youth mental health first aid, or you want to set up a different type of training and education, I am more than happy to chat about that with you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And with that, I will stop the recording, and I will make sure that I get all this information out to you all. And I hope you all have a great week, and I hope you all enjoy the warmer weather that's coming. Have a great day, everyone.